This is Mommying While Muslim, recorded live and unedited. Watch as Zeba and Uzma record their podcast, see their reactions, and find out for yourself what all the buzz is about.
This episode is brought to you by Guidance Residential, whose fall refinance special is finally here. Not only can you unlock a lower rate to save thousands of dollars over the course of your contract to own your home sooner, you can also receive $500 towards your appraisal fee. Visit Guidance Residential on Facebook or at Guidance Residential on Instagram today. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Momming While Muslim podcast. This is Uzma Jaffrey, and as you might note from our video today, Zeba is out, and we wish her a full and complete recovery. Please remember her in your dua or prayers, that she's back on her feet and back recording in our studio next week, inshallah. So actually, in a couple of days, we have some more recordings. So I hope she's back on her feet by then. I'm really excited to continue this month, but I'm going to go ahead and do our soapbox so that we can get right into this interview, because I know a lot of people like me have been waiting for it. I mean, can I say 2 years? Yeah, 2 years, and some of you for the entire month. So our soapbox for today is about a particular group out of Maryland called Protecting Against Hate Crimes. And that's definitely relevant this month. But in particular, since 2019, this particular organization has been giving buku money to organizations that are going to help protect vulnerable groups from hate crimes. So 30 Maryland-based, faith-based nonprofits got anywhere from $25 to get this $105,000 this year in 2021. But every single masjid or every single Islamic organization that applied for this grant was rejected. So obviously CARE, who we know very well on this particular podcast, has penned an open letter to PAC to talk about why this is happening. So some of the reasons why, like, I know we all want to jump on the discrimination bandwagon because we're Muslim and a minority marginalized group. And so we're pretty hypersensitive about something like that. But as part of the American Muslim Women's Giving Circle, some of you guys are a part of that and helped us launch it this year. We also screen nonprofits for grants. Obviously, we have something like $27,000 to give out this year to nonprofits. And there's certain financial information and organizational information that you have. You have to prove a commitment to, accountability, sustainability, showing that you have projects where this money is being put to good use. And then most important to our particular giving circle, and I'm sure a lot of grant givers, philanthropists in the field now, you have to show a higher commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you have to have a plan. And, your organization has to look like it's serving everybody. Even if you have a niche population that you're targeting, you need the rainbow, guys. Everybody's got to look for the rainbow. So I'm thinking that maybe based on that, come on, let's face it, a lot of Muslim organizations aren't super diverse, they're not super equitable, and they're not super organized. So maybe they got rejected on that basis. But I think this kind of a letter is really important, and these kind of call outs are really, really important to be like, how come every single other religion has representation in your grant pool of award winners, but there's no Muslims? Like, that's not diverse, that's not equitable, and that's not inclusive. So get behind CARE Maryland and contact Protecting Against Hate Crimes. Drop them an email. It'll be right on their website, and ask them the same question that CARE is asking. Why did every Muslim organization get rejected? And hopefully they have a transparent process, as our giving circle does. We have a rubric, we have scorecards to actually assess and put a numerical value on what these organizations are bringing. And PAC should have something like that so that we know that it's a very objective and transparent process by which they deselected Muslims. So put some pressure on them. Let's get some more money into our hands, because we know that we can't do enough for hate crimes. And on that note, given hate crimes, we are continuing our month about queer Muslims, and we have some amazing guests on. And you guys are really mad at us because last week we didn't have an episode. And you're like, where are our guests? Like, bring them back. Okay, they're here. And so we are super excited to bring on somebody that, we found on, I think it was the Queer Muslim Project. And just, me and my cyber stalking. And so I went and I looked and I was like, oh my gosh, look at all the work that she does. And I very much, Zeba, and I very much respect her for her fair housing activism for transgender people, and that's really for all people. Fair housing is something that we're all struggling with across the country during this real estate bubble, which actually she's an expert on talking about too. But I think it's important to note that she's fighting for all of us, even though a lot of us would not fight for her. So let that irony sit with you and be uncomfortable with it, and then do something about it. So we are so happy to introduce Feroza Sayed, a real estate veteran for 13 years. She also runs for fun. We don't know those kinds of people because then they make us run with them. So we're excited. Maybe she will inspire us to do it. But she's been speaking about her experience as a transgender woman for several years now. So we're very, very appreciative that she's here to share her experiences. Welcome, Feroza, and Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you so much for having me, Uzma.
We usually kick off this podcast by asking some questions about motherhood, but you are brand new to our show and our platform, and we would love for the audience to hear a little bit out of your mouth about yourself before we jump into questions.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Thank you so much again for having me, and I hope that Zainab feels better very, very soon, inshallah. My name is Feroza Sayed. I am a multi-million-dollar producing associate broker with Atlanta Fine Homes Sotheby's International Realty. I am a woman. I am brown. I am a daughter of Indian immigrants. I am Muslim, and I am trans. So effectively, I'm the anti-Trump.
Every intersection possible, she's hitting
right. I'm an advocate and an activist in my spare time, and I work with multiple different organizations. I sit on the national board for the LGBTQ+ Real Estate Alliance. That's kind of a mix of my advocacy and my career. And then I sit on the local board for Trans Housing Coalition, which is an organization that houses TGNC, or transgender and non-conforming people, in the Atlanta area. We currently have 30 people that we've taken from homeless to permanent or transitionary housing in the Atlanta area. Also worked with DCQ, which is an organization that serves Desi queer folks. But we could go on and on and on. And I sit on the board with the LGBTQ advisory board to the mayor of the city of Atlanta, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms currently, and I'm the trans affairs co-chair for that board.
Yeah.
But I also do political advocacy and activism. So we can go through a lot of different stuff here. But
we talked a lot about the Georgia vote. Was it earlier this year? And so you were one of those people that was out there on the streets doing the hard work and getting people to register and to actually vote and, cause a storm, which you guys did beautifully. Thank you so much. And, if you ever hang out with Stacey Abrams, tell her we love her, so that I don't have to go cyber stalking her, but I've already sort of done that.
I'll let her know next time I see her.
Yes, that'd be awesome. Thank you. So we kick off the show by asking women about their motherhood experience, but if they don't have kids, then we'll ask sometimes about their moms, their momming philosophy that they were raised with, and how that informs their work now.
Awesome. I will give you kind of both aspects. I have 6 nieces and nephews under 6 years old, when they were all born under 6 years old, but now they're all under 11 years old. So we have a full house of kids, and I can give you my perspectives on being a really fun and cool auntie, and then also tell you a little bit more about what it's been like being raised by my mom, who is absolutely amazing. My mom ran a multi-million-dollar IT firm. She actually literally just retired. And if I can have a quarter or a 16th of the success that she has in her life, I think, mashallah, I would be doing very, very well. She was always a go-getter, but she was also very present as a mom, super involved on the day-to-day with us. And, I think that also often, as Muslim women or, South Asian women, we are expected to run the world and then the household, which is very standard. I grew up in one of those households where she was running around, working again in IT and managing, hundreds of people, millions of dollars in budgets for GTE back then, and then it was bought out by Verizon. And an absolutely inspirational space to grow up in, watching, South Asian immigrant woman who was Muslim go out there and kill it. She was very, very conservative, so she was always wearing those Hillary Clinton pantsuits.
Nice.
And even now, she wears hijab now, and started wearing hijab about 7-8 years ago in her career as well. But, we often face discrimination when you're wearing hijab. So I think that, is only in relevant spaces. And I kind of follow that similar philosophy in spaces where I need to. I'm a little bit more conservative, but open-minded in completely other spaces. My mom had an overwhelmingly positive style of parenting, though she was always a disciplinarian as well. I think that, growing up, as you can imagine, being a trans woman in a Muslim household was very difficult for me. At 14, I had tried killing myself about 4 times. And on the last time, when she found out, is kind of when we discussed me being, a trans woman. And long story short, we had this really amazing conversation where my mom talked to me about being positive and how everybody always thinks that she's so jolly and loving and, has this exuberant personality, and that it takes a lot of work to be in that space, that often the easier road is the one to be negative or allow yourself to sit in those spaces and feel sorry for yourself, but that, waking up every day and having a smile on your face or, fighting is a lot harder than it is to just give up and be in those spaces. So that was a very, I think, relevant conversation for me as a 14 or 15-year-old who's going through a lot of stuff. And I think that that's kind of how I, am with my nieces and nephews as well, making sure that they know that they're loved and that they're amazing little beings, right?
Yeah.
And that they can accomplish anything they want. If you've ever seen the movie, where she says, "You're smart, you're kind, and you're."
Oh yeah, The Help. You is kind. I love that one.
So yeah, a lot of the music, my nephews get that all the time. You're kind, you're caring, you're smart, you're amazing. And that's how you should live your life.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And it makes me so happy to know that you grew up in such a positive environment, like not just that your mom was able to affirm and reassure you at 14 years old at this critical stage in your life, but also that she role modeled like such badassery. I think that that's really important. And when you're talking about like running the world and then running home, like that so resonates for those of us who work outside of the home as well, because you never clock out. As a Muslim woman, no matter where you're from, you're expected to go. And I think that that's kind of true of women across the board, like no matter what religion you are or what cultural background you have. So we talk a lot about that kind of invisible work of motherhood. So or womanhood as well. So tell us a little bit about your family background and then what led up to that point when whatever you're comfortable sharing with us about your suicidal attempts.
So I grew up in a very conservative Muslim family. We're Sunni, and then from India and Hyderabad. And as many of you can imagine, when you grow up in America, I think for first generation children, you may be in America, but you are definitely in India when you walk in the door, right? So, juta nikalo, take off their shoes,
wear a dupatta, wear the back
language, yes, all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, right? And so it, as loving and supporting as my mom is now, and we can talk about this progression of how she's really grown, I think, as a person, it was a very difficult space to grow up in. I was always hearing things, like my uncles would say, one time we were at the Olympics in 1996, and
Wow.
I saw some queer people walking by, and some guys had Daisy Dukes on, and one of my uncles said, well, if they were in Saudi Arabia, these people would get stoned to death. And a couple of my other uncles were giggling, and like my male cousins and stuff. And for me, I'm like, in my teens, haven't come out to my parents, and I'm thinking, oh my God, these people are going to ship me off to Saudi Arabia, right? Like if I come out, this is what's going to happen. And I kind of giggle about it now, but it really was a valid, like that's where I was in my mind. Like it wasn't, I didn't feel safe coming out to my family.
Sure.
I would have rather died, which is why I tried killing myself rather than telling my parents. And it wasn't necessarily only fear. It was the shame, the dishonor of, your parents in community having a queer or trans child. It didn't really I mean, we're talking about, I'm 40 years old, and this was 25, 20, almost 30 years ago that, I was going through these kinds of things. And it's not the same environment we have now that we did back then. There was also no internet, no way for me to really connect with other kids or, realize that I wasn't, alone in my experience. And now we know that there are obviously, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Muslim queer folk around the world. And, it makes it a lot easier because you have a sense of community. So when I came out originally, my mom and dad, again, were very, very conservative. My mom took me to a therapist to try to, quote unquote, fix me. Because at first, obviously, any mother's reaction, generally speaking, is going to be that don't ever try to do this again. I love you, right? And, don't try to hurt yourself in this way. But then they kind of moved into damage control mode, which was to take me to a therapist and see if we could figure out what was going on here and fix it. Unfortunately for them, they didn't know. They took me to a gender specialist who very much affirmed who I was as a person. It was the first time I'd ever spoken to somebody outside of my house, outside of me and maybe a friend, that really understood what was going on and gave me terminology. Back then, they used to call it gender dysphoria. Mm-hmm. And so that you're not a freak, you're not abnormal, you are, one of, again, hundreds of thousands of people around the world who has this condition, and it's very, very common. And I had talked to her about all my plans to transition and what I was going to do. And, one of the things that I think I experienced, in youth that queer people experience, especially when they're Muslim and youth, is planning out our lives. Like, I thought my whole family was going to disown me, right? So at, 12, 13, 14 years old, I was planning how I would get into college. How would I pay for grants? What would I do? If I didn't do good in school, I would have panic attacks if I didn't have all A's, because if I don't get a scholarship, my parents are going to throw me out. I'm never going to be able to succeed. So that level of trauma and pressure on a child, feeling like they have to plan all that kind of stuff out, can be a little bit excessive. But when she came out, she talked to my mom. She said she's never met a 13-year-old who knew themselves better than me. And she worked with patients from young kids all the way up into their 50s and 60s. And she said something to the effect of, your daughter is a very smart, beautiful person. And my mom was like, daughter, because at this point I haven't even transitioned. She didn't understand. But what she did do was tell me to go to a youth group, which was life-changing for me. And back in the day in Atlanta, we had an organization called Youth Pride here that had queer kids, LGBTQ kids meet and talk. And it was life-changing for me. I met my best friend there, and we're still best friends, 25 years later. And slowly that kind of progression moved on. I presented as male all the way through the end of high school. I had begged my parents if they would let me get on hormone therapy to stop kind of any masculinization, any facial hair more growing, my shoulders getting wider, and they refused. They thought that I was too young to be making changes with my body, and that anything I wanted to do would have to be done on my own. Additionally, from the respect of Islam, they thought that them in any way financially supporting this would be a sin. And to this day, very much kind of are in that, frame of thought that putting any financial money towards this or anything like that. So it's a very difficult space for them. And I respect and love my parents, and they respect and love me, but we have different, kind of mind states on things. And, when you're first generation, obviously your parents may have different opinions than you do on certain things. Anyways, I started at, I think it was my junior year of high school, growing my hair out, kind of thinning my eyebrows a little bit longer, wearing little tighter clothes, and slowly started the transition process. I definitely knew that I wasn't one of those kids that could come home one day and, have a full face on and be like, hey, this is who I am, like it or leave it, because they'd be like, well, we're leaving it. So my transition was very well thought out for my particular family and their background, in the sense that I knew that for my parents' sake, in order for them to accept me and be okay with this, it had to be a little bit more of a progression. That it's not something that could be that jarring for them, right? And at 19 years old, I transitioned full time, and I have what's called passing privilege. So I'm about 5'4.5", and nobody knows. I was previously married. I got divorced, but even my in-laws didn't know for roughly 12 years, me and Stephen being together. So
Yeah.
I'm blessed in that perspective. And I think that kind of eases that, some of their concern for me as far as safety or being out,
Right.
violence and things like that occurring. Obviously, as Muslim women, again, we already deal with being Muslim or when your head's covered or, things like that. But I think that gives them some relief. When I transitioned in college, I had some really violent experiences.
Oh, no.
I have been thrown down stairwells. I have been raped. I've been spit on. I've been choked out. Cis straight men don't really take it very well when they're very attracted to you and you go out of your way to be, a kind, caring, and, respectful person and make sure that they know that you're a trans woman. Those experiences led me through a lot of violence, like I said, early in my, transition and college. And I lived in a space where I wanted to not acknowledge who I was as far as a trans woman for a long time. I mean, obviously when I was dating guys, they always knew, but it just became something where I thought that living in anonymity was a lot easier. And I had this passing privilege, so why not take advantage of it? So for the following roughly, 10 years plus, I lived in a space where in my career, in my friend circles, being out, doing any kind of political advocacy or things like that, I was not an out person. So nobody knew that I was trans. And then as we built up in that space, I came back out around, it was 2016 that Trump started running. And as you
Isn't
very
that
well know,
that's it's 9/11 for us, and then it's 2016 November.
Right.
It's like
I mean, we were having
for all of us.
conversations around the kitchen table. I mean, I talk to Muslim friends all the time, and they always say, we were all sitting around the table, and my mom was like, well, how much money does everybody have? And are the kids' passports done? And you're talking about a database, right? So like Muslim families were having these conversations in 2016 that I think other families didn't necessarily have these conversations about possibly leaving the country. Where would we go? Would we go back to India? Could we, file for status, for refugee status in another country? I mean, at the time, right?
I didn't think about refugee status. I was just like, where can we go?
Like the Holocaust and what happened with Jewish people, because there's always somewhere it starts. And, having experienced Islamophobia personally, and then also, my family experiencing Islamophobia, it had gotten to this turning point in the country and we were all very scared. But then it was, the trans ban for me. Then it was women's rights. Then as a brown woman who actually met my parents in Charlottesville, Virginia for the first time because they were living there when I transitioned, seeing, the KKK and all these racist people come out. I mean, it was just all this triggering going on all through 2016 and 2017. And finally, I got to a point where I really just kept wondering why I was very depressed. I was sad. I was having trouble concentrating at work. And I came to the point or the realization where I realized I need to really not just be able to advocate for Muslim people, not just be advocating for women people or Black people and brown people or, all the different identities that I hold, but that I needed to be able to advocate for myself as a trans woman. And in 2018, I sat down with my family, with my brothers, my mom and dad, and talked to them and said, the deal was, because I had passing privilege, that I would not be out, until the kids were older, because this was, again, something that they didn't want the grandkids and my nieces and nephews to really be exposed to, in a sense, right? And this is, again, a different background from, and I'm sure there's people on this, podcast that may think, wow, well, that's really close-minded. But, that's kind of where our family, the background I grew up in, very conservative. And I told them, crying, that I just felt like it was time for me to really own every aspect of me and who I was. And I came out in a semi-viral post, I think on February 1st, 2018, that went crazy, had something like 75,000, likes in Pantsuit Nation and thousands of shares from my page. And it talked about all the different identities I was and why it was important for me to be out and to be fighting. And since 2018, I've spent my free time advocating and being an activist in all of these different ways for all my different intersections, because I definitely want to make sure that we're countering a lot of the hate that we're seeing and the divisiveness in this country right now.
Yeah, no.
So that's 100%. A little bit about my family background, my journey, and my faith.
Yeah, no, that's everything. It's just like, it's so riveting to hear, painful, because you kind of coming from backgrounds like this, and I would argue that your family is not an exception. I think they're actually the rule, where somebody's got to live, like you're trading in your right and your agency to own your identity and live your life the way you want to, as openly as you want, with these nieces and nephews that you love, and potentially teach them more acceptance and more inclusion. But hush hush, like, we don't want, and I know this as somebody, as a family member who also put stipulations like this in my own family,
Yes.
not about LGBTQ stuff, but other things that I don't want my kids exposed to it, so don't say it. So I know firsthand, well, I know what it feels like to be on both sides, where
Yeah.
you're trading something and then where you're actually kind of the oppressor.
Yes.
And
So I've often said, in speeches that queer people, Muslim or not, Jewish, Christian, regardless, often we have to choose between our existence and our religion, or our families, either or. And, in a way, I chose not to exist, right?
Right.
For all those years coming up until just about 4 years ago, because I felt like that's what I had to do, is push it all away, push it aside, in order to be in the spaces that I wanted to be in.
Right. And that, I just find it tragic, but I'm glad that things changed for you. I'm sad that they had to change as a result of 2016, but there was some good that came out of it, because what I think we found is that Muslims, as a marginalized community, realize that you can't be more divisive within an already you can't further marginalize a marginalized community. It doesn't make any sense. So for all those people in 2016 who were Muslim and voted for him, a lot of times, I mean, there was an article about a Muslim woman, I think out of Maryland or DC Metro somewhere, and she ran an organization for conservative Muslims for Trump because they were voting strictly on his anti-LGBTQ promises, which he did put his money where his mouth is and passed those discriminatory laws. So at that time, even though I wasn't a great ally of LGBTQ plus people, I was like, that's so stupid. You're like a one ticket. Like, that was the one issue that you chose.
There's lots of one ticket voters, though. People vote on abortion, people vote on LGBTQ rights. I mean, and it's crazy. It shouldn't be this way, but yes, it's kind of like marginalized communities, whether you're Black, you're brown, you're Muslim, you're LGBTQ, you're, Latinx. It's just, people are almost put in spaces where it's like you have to fight one another, or it feels like you're supposed to, other one another in these marginalized groups, so that, your group has a chance of pushing up and forward. But it's not the case at all, because when we all band together and fight for equity and equality amongst all the organized, organizations and backgrounds and identities, then we really push that needle forward together collectively as a group.
Right, exactly. And it just seems so myopic and narrow-minded to be, thinking about just one issue, because that's not even in our religious tradition. Like, we're a greater good tradition and a religion of greater good. And a lot of our critics, I don't know if you know, but we had like a record number of followers like drop off, like 2,000 in 48 hours.
Oh, wow.
When we announced that we were going to talk to queer Muslims this month, nothing had been published yet. Like, they hadn't heard the episodes. So it was immediately like, based on this one issue, all of your content is crap, and because you're agreeing to talk to somebody who is different than us and different than our understanding, that's enough reason to cut you off. And you know what we said? Good, because then the people who are left here are the distilled ones, who are people that are for and from greater good and understand our future role, I think, in this country and in this world.
But I think it's important for those of us who are left, the followers who are still here, making sure that they are still communicating with those folks, because often what we do is we get into these bubbles, right? Where, I'm only going to hang out with liberal Democrats, and all these Trump people, I'm going to unfriend them, or I'm going to unfriend people who are not Muslim, or I'm going to not talk to these folks because they're not like me. And one of the things that I found in my advocacy and activism is that often it just takes a personal story, or humanizing someone, or knowing someone of that background. So, we run across people who don't know anybody who's Muslim, and they're afraid of Sharia law coming down here, and,
That's so Georgia.
changing everything, right? And in the South, and then boom, they meet somebody, like me potentially in a grocery store, and they're saying something. I've done this a couple of times where they're saying something Islamophobic, and I'm like, well, I'm Muslim, and they look down, and my ankles are showing, and I'm not in a hijab, and then I'm like, hey, and then what you just said is not true, and correct people. But then all of a sudden, well, you're Muslim. Oh, cool. Well, you sound just like us. Well, yeah, I was born in America. You know what I mean? But I think that having these minor conversations with people, opening people's minds, really makes a big difference. And if people just leave and then never have this exposure, never talk about things, you can't really grow as a person if you're not having new experiences. And we have to make sure that we share the information that we have with folks often who are not in those spaces. And my parents are a prime example of that. I often tell, LGBTQ kids that, when I was younger, I used to feel like I was this burden, this, dishonor, this shame, this horrible thing that happened to my family. And now I can look back in retrospect, Isma, and I am one of the best things that ever happened to my family, in the sense that I have helped them progress in their mind state, in their views, and in their true love of, people, and being non-judgmental and open, and in spaces we might not agree on everything, but we respect and love one another. And I think that my parents have found new ways to be better Muslims, because I think ultimately, right, the goal of any major religion, whether again it's Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and everything, is not to hate, not to other, not to push people aside. It's to bring people together, to love, to have faith, to honor God. And how better to do that than to include everyone, especially those who are most marginalized. And when you think about our prophets, whether it's Isa as salam or Musa as salam, or peace be upon him, Prophet Muhammad, that they all were in spaces where they hung out with people who were diseased and poor and queer and marginalized, and they never judged those people, right? They always brought their best foot forward to make sure that they were loving and inclusive. So when we read these stories, it's one thing to say, oh, well, yes, these amazing prophets of Islam are idealistic in what we would want to be, but then you turn around and you behave in a completely different way than the way the people that we, look up to and respect in our religion, or any religion, behaved in actuality.
100%. I think it's funny, you probably haven't seen, but we had, I like to talk to the trolls. I give them a hard time because, I want them to see what you just said, on paper, like, look at how hypocritical you're being. And one of them, first they got the whole prophet, Prophet Luth wrong, and they quoted the wrong prophet. So I was like, I think you're talking about the wrong one. Go back and read your Quran. And then the verse, it's, yes, the prophetic model is really important to talk about love too, but also the Prophet ﷺ talking, or the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking to Prophet ﷺ in the Quran and saying, if you had been harsh with the people, then they wouldn't have listened to you. And, his character and his kindness and his generosity to non-Muslims is what brought them to Islam and continues to bring people to Islam, like his teachings and everything. And I posted that, and this one person was like, oh, well, are you saying that the Quran like trumps what all these other scholars are saying about LGBTQ? And I'm like, yeah, the Quran kind of trumps everything anybody says.
Sorry, but scholars are not the end all be all.
Exactly.
You look at religion and from this perspective, you go to Saudi Arabia versus Pakistan versus Iran versus India. These are all different cultural bringing, that we beliefs that we also bring into our version of Islam. It's not just, and these different scholars have different sayings and feel different ways. How can you,
they're human,
in Iran, get gender of affirmation surgery paid for by the government if you're a trans woman. And Pakistan, there's been a lot of progression for TGNC, or trans and gender nonconforming rights, more specifically towards women transitioning. So biologically born men transitioning towards women.
Easier.
Versus, so there's many scholars that don't believe what some of the other scholars are saying. So it's really interesting. I mean, when it comes to my faith journey, it's been a very difficult journey.
Sure. Tell us
going
about that.
from a space where I wanted to just only be Muslim, and I would have done anything to be who I was back then. And so much so that at some points it felt like I just had to go away, because there was no way I could align my faith and my existence, to a place where then I backed away from Islam completely, because I had to choose my existence. And in that space, and this is the one thing I would want to tell mothers here, is if you want your kids to have that connection to their faith and to their culture and to their religion, don't other them to the point where they have to choose between their religion and choose between their families and choose between their faith. Because I went through a whole 15 to 20 year period there where, rather than maybe being, a little bit more conservative or hijabi or praying 5 times a day and doing the things that I did, that I kind of wilded out in a sense, because it was like, well, there's no root here anymore, right? Everything that is your family, that is your background, that is your faith, and everything else despises you. So what's the point of trying to fit into any of this? And in my adulthood now, I'm kind of discovering my faith and my connection through organizations like, Muslims for Progressive Values and other spaces that are loving, kind, and non-judgmental. But I think that, it was a very difficult space to get back to that and to allow myself. And honestly, that whole experience of coming back out in 2018, I prayed so much during that time of being depressed and down. And the overwhelming feeling I kept getting was that I needed to come back out. I needed to come back out, and I needed to love it and own it. For me, similarly to when I transitioned, I had gone to Umrah, and I touched the Kaaba and I prayed, crying to fix me, or make it go away, or give me a sign, or make it so that I can. And everything in my life in that time period as well led towards me transitioning, stronger feelings daily, and I feel like I am who I am for a reason. And that particular, aspect of my faith, for me is very personal. I mean, we're talking about it today because it's momming with Muslims, but I hold that near and dear to my heart. And I believe that every Muslim has that right. Islamically, it's given to us that we don't have to follow an imam, that we don't have to follow anyone, that everything we need is in the Quran, that you can pray 5 times a day, and that you don't need anything other than what has been given to you. And I hold that relationship with God very close to my heart. And I pray how I need to pray. And, I'm working on finding spaces in which I can have more of a community feel, like, reading namaz and jamaat and masjids, and finding LGBTQ spaces where other Muslims, still believe as well.
Yeah. And that's what we're coming across is, we've talked about like Mommies in the Masjid earlier this year in May, and that was our series about how the masjid isn't welcoming to straight women. So what is it like for, queer women, and where do they go? And especially in the case of transgender people, there was a whole case. I live in Phoenix, so there was like a national case about where does the transgender woman pray? And it hit the news like crazy. And eventually they unmasked her. They kicked her out of the masjid. And, I want to know, in your experience, what have you seen, or what have you encountered, or how do transgender people go about in a partition masjid? Like, where do you go pray?
It's such a personal decision, and it makes me kind of want to tear up. Because for years, Uzma, I couldn't pray as a woman. And one of the main reasons why I didn't pray,
No, please.
was because I was raised in this conservative background, right? Where I was told that because I was pre-op, or because of my genitalia or my body, right? I couldn't be praying here or I couldn't pray there. And I had internalized it so hard that even when I was at home alone in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I couldn't get on a janimaz and pray because I felt like I was committing this horrid sin against God to worship my God or to love my God by just being who I am. And it's so crazy to think that you can misconstrue and make this beautiful thing about prayer and ibadat and, honoring your God into this disgusting conversation about what you have, where you have it in between your legs. I mean, think about intersex people who are born with, genitalia that may not perfectly
ambiguous
fit.
genitalia.
Allah made them the way they are, right? And very much so, I believe, made me the way I am. But how do you pray then, right? Where do you pray when, you have organs that might not fit into everything? Do you pick the gender for that child as a baby, or do you allow them to grow and figure out where because there's so many cases of intersex people having, surgery
reassigned,
and then growing up later and they're like, well, I feel like a man. And then they're again, put into the characterization that they're trans, but they're not. They were born intersex and you changed their gender. So these conversations, first of all, are nobody's goddamn business. What I have in between my legs, where I want to pray, what I want to do is none of anyone's concern. And it's not anyone's concern where a cisgendered woman wants to pray, where a trans woman wants to pray. It shouldn't matter. If somebody is praying, you should say, mashallah, Allah ka shukar hai that this person wants to show their ibadat and faith to God, and that person should be welcome, because that's what Islam is about, right? And yes, growing up, these experiences for me were triggering, traumatic, toxic, and led to a space where I didn't want to be. Honestly, when we got married, me and Stephen, he had converted to Islam of his own, accord, mashallah. And when we got married, I had been going to a masjid just to see if I could find an imam locally who would marry me. And at the time, we didn't have, I didn't have connections with queer imams or anything like that. I was still living undercover. I was not an out TGNC woman. So I went to a masjid and I literally effectively had an imam marry me who didn't know I was a trans woman.
I was going to say, why would you tell him?
What? Because that was the only way I knew that I would find an imam to marry me. Even though I was post-op, I am again, physically a woman, not that that has anything to do with womanhood, let me clarify. But, from all the religious perspectives, right?
Oh, no, I was saying, why would you tell him anyway?
Yeah, but I mean, like, I was talking about my being post-op. That has nothing to do with being
right.
You can be pre-op and be a woman, so I'm just clarifying that point.
Sure.
But, it was scary. Yeah. Why would I tell him? Because then they would say no. And then I couldn't find an imam. And this is the crazy thing. Then people would say, well, Firoza is, a slut. She's living in sin. She's,
right. Yeah.
With this man, look at her, what kind of, quote unquote Muslim woman is she? But then I can't even get married. Queer people can't even get married.
Yeah.
If they want to have any kind of ceremony that honors our faith or has them living in a space where they feel like, I'm married to this person and you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not committing sin in a sense. Not that I believe, again, it's sex, having sex as a sin, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, no problem. We won't get into that part, but I appreciate all of these conversations because, I think that last point is really, really important because we would tutu or poo-poo or however you want to say it, somebody who's not getting married, who's cis straight, and then, deny somebody who is queer and who wants to be in a committed, monogamous, halal relationship. Like that's wrong, and you're going to vote for a demon because you've demonized this human being who wants to show commitment, to a person and to their God. And I think that hypocrisy, I don't understand that double standard. It's taken me a long time to think about those situations, be faced with those situations and say, oh, that doesn't make sense. Like, why wouldn't we be?
None of it really makes sense. We shouldn't be judging people for any reason.
Right.
They're again, I think we had this in a brief conversation before, shirk, or comparing yourself to God is the gravest sin, one of the gravest sins you can commit in Islam, right?
Yeah.
And often I tell people that when they are judging people, when they are constantly saying, well, this person shouldn't do this, or this person shouldn't do that, and God doesn't approve of this, God doesn't approve of that. Who are you to tell anyone, Muslim or otherwise, what God approves and what God doesn't approve? Because what you're doing in that statement is comparing yourself to God, or that what God wants. And none of us do, right?
None of us do.
Because, it's not even something we can conceive, right? So I think that people need to understand that ultimately the best way to be a really good Muslim, in my opinion, is to love everyone, to not judge anyone. And again, my family in this weird way is a really great, story on this again, where, they're still conservative. They still are growing up. And, one of my nieces has a friend who happens to be TGNC. I mean, they're like 10, 11, 12 now years old, right? And her mother said something to the effect of, well, that's really cool, right? So this is talking about how, you say you have certain lines, right? Well, when so-and-so used to come over before, they were a girl, right? And now they're identifying as a boy. But Islamically, we don't allow you to spend the nights, right, with other boys. So though we love everybody and respect everybody, and this is a hard line for me, though you can still be friends with him, right, after the young boy transitioned. A decade ago, if I would have talked to probably that same sister-in-law, it would have been like, oh my God, right? You can't hang out with this child. You can't, and I'm sure, it's within limited spaces and things that she's still growing and feeling safe in, but she understands that this child needs a safe space, right? Yeah. This child needs to have their same friends that they had before. Suicide is the highest among LGBTQ. And then when you look at trans kids specifically as a demographic, the highest rates of suicide per capita in any demographic of people, because it's such a difficult thing to deal with. And when a child is 10, 11, or 12, going through that transition and having a small supportive space, but then also being able to align your Muslim values with, saying, well, now that he's a boy or identifies as a boy, these are certain things I'm not okay with, right? Yeah. It's really cool to see people be in spaces where they can be non-judgmental and grow and love and understand that it's not a threat. Honestly, I've taken my boys out once with, a couple who's two lesbian women and my nephews. And their question was, well, why does she have two mommies? And I was like, well, because some families have one mommy and one daddy, some have two mommies and some have two daddies. And aren't you lucky? You have one mommy and one daddy. You get one of each, right? They're like, oh, that is kind of cool, right? Yeah. And they didn't ask any more questions.
Yeah.
They were literally
and stop.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. When you take things, it's kind of, I often tell this to my family, but when you're taking things and making them a no, or a, you can't talk about this. And this relates to haram gosh, right? Yeah. We're eating meat that's not allowed, or bacon, or alcohol, or anything. But being LGBTQ, you make it something that's a no, this is bad, this is horrible. And it's like the preacher's daughter mentality is what I call it, right? Yeah. You get out of that repressive household, and honey, you are doing everything you can. What do you want to try?
That pork chop.
I'm that Muslim, right? Like all Muslims, like that has never eaten pork and is like, everything else,
But I won't eat pork.
I've transitioned genders, and I have, shown my boobs and my ankles and everything else. But alamia, when I come in front of you, I did not have
pork free.
I was pork free. Okay. But all jokes aside, I think what happens is often people, they have these experiences where they're really repressed, and then they shoot out and want to try those things, versus what I found firsthand. And again, this is mommying while Muslim, with my nieces and nephews now, is that if you don't make it a really big deal, right? And just kind of explain it in a way that suits your family, right? You know, we are cool with you hanging out with these kids. We are cool with you hanging out with these kids, which I would beg you to reconsider. But whatever's going on in these spaces, but that we love and we don't judge all. It can change that child's life, it can save a child's life, including your own, because you don't know if your child is trans or queer if they don't want you to know. I can tell you that much to all the moms that are listening today. If I can make it to 13 and 14, look like this, be a trans woman, and I can cover my bases where my parents had no earthly idea that, you know, I was a trans woman, and go through that, then your kid could be doing the same. And if you are rearing your children in spaces where they're afraid and they're scared and fearful versus just you saying something as simple as, well, we love all, we don't judge anybody, and it's okay. You know, it's not something that we promote per se in your family. Again, my family, I promote anything, right? But I'm just talking to the listeners.
Sure.
Then maybe you might be able to save your own child's life. You 100%. Might be able to save another child's life. You may be able to save your niece or nephew's life, and, you know, create a space in which we're a little bit more loving and a little bit more understanding.
Yeah. And I think it's for our kids that yes, we wanted to talk to queer Muslims, but it was really in order to learn, like, how do we react if our kids are queer? And, you know, is that really the worst? Like, so many peers of ours, mom sisters, will say, oh, that's the worst thing my kid can do to me. That's problematic in and of itself. Yes, but, you know, to say that that's the worst thing that can happen to your child, there's death. And then there's leaving Islam, you know, and to us, to Zeba and myself,
but murdering people.
There's murdering people.
I mean, there's so many other things, but like, I can literally go into my extended family. I have 45 members of my family in the Atlanta area, vast majority of whom don't talk to me still. It's been 20 plus years since I transitioned. And in those families, there's been people who, you know, had everything.
Sure.
Right? We're not going to air out the Syed family dirty laundry today, but let's just
every family does have that drama,
right? Yeah. Of craziness that has happened in all of their individual families. But I'm the one child who cannot be invited to family gatherings. I am the one person who people don't want to say salam to. I am the one person who, and there's a million things, again, that I can think of that have been worse than what I did, which was just transitioning, changing my own body, not
hurting anybody,
not changing anyone else, not committing crimes, not doing anything else. And these people say, well, you know, she's, you know, not allowed to be around or not be present. And to this day, but the odd thing is, that's given me the freedom to be who I am. Yeah. And by being not in those spaces that were repressive and that guilt and that toxicity, I've been able to really learn to love myself in a way that is absolutely amazing. And when you truly love yourself, amazing things happen. And my life is a testament to that. The last 4 years of my life have been absolutely insane, Uzma. I've been on stage with Wanda Sykes and Tig Notaro, Grand Marshal for Pride, spoken in front of thousands of people, and more than anything else, and those accomplishments that, you know, I'm putting, you know, this weight on, it's the day-to-day conversations. I get parents who reach out to me constantly on social media or have calls at nighttime and talk to parents and have changed perspectives for kids and the visibility that's come along with it in a way that makes it okay for kids like me who were in spaces like I was in to be okay and not have to maybe go through the same pain that I went through. And I think that is probably ultimately like one of my greatest accomplishments. And I don't know how to measure that, right? Yeah. Because I just do it from a visibility perspective and from an advocacy perspective, but it really is amazing to watch the micro changes in my family and extend it out and in community and family, but I don't know how that reverberates out, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you reached us, you know, and we accidentally stumbled upon you, but it was just seeing the work that you do and, you know, seeing your story put out there and the different things you've said about it, or I mean, the same things that you said about it, but, you know, answering all these different questions, it's touched us. And I think that the audience that we have remaining, it's fabulous because these are things that honestly, we did not grow up with. We graduated high school back in '96 and it was unheard of. But, you know, when you're talking about destigmatizing things like de-eroticizing, exoticizing, tabooing them, de-tabooing them is really important, because I had the same experience with my kids. Like, oh, how come she has two moms? And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, because, Allah loves her more and gave her two mothers. Like, who needs a dad? To share the workload. I would love to have a co-mom. That would be awesome. But my husband is like anti-polygamy, so there's that. But they were like, oh, okay, no problem. And they didn't ask any questions. They did ask questions when one of their schoolmates was TGNC or TG. Did I say that correctly? Okay. And the first year, so she was not sure where she was, and her mom worked at the school and was totally supportive. The Muslim contingency, and there was a large Muslim contingency at that private school, and they were up in arms. How dare that mother support her child? She should be telling her exactly who and what she is. No, it wasn't.
Okay.
And I'm like,
all right. I was about to say, please connect me.
No, I mean, regardless of what the child's belief system was, I was like, who can, she's not hurting you. Oh, that she's confusing my children. And I'm like, no, your kids aren't confused, because they're still playing like they always played. They're eating together like they always played. And then the second year she did transition completely, but the lack of acceptance and the lack of a safe space in a private school for this child from non-Muslim and Muslim families was so strong that they had to leave the state.
Yeah,
how
it happens all the time. I have kids here that we go in, talk to, and I used to work with, PFLAG has 2 huge chapters here in the Atlanta area that have youth groups, and I was a facilitator for those groups. Mm-hmm. And the misconception is that being LGBTQ or trans is so much easier now, that it's just totally fine, and it's not at all. We had suicidal kids in the, in those groups. We had parents who had been completely othered and thrown out of communities, churches, spaces, schools. It's just insanity, and all because a child chose to be who they are. And this is what's so funny about all this binary, right? Like, I'm a binary trans woman. I just definitely transitioned. And then, versus non-binary and everything else. Why I think we've seen the immense growth we have is because of the non-binary and gender non-conforming community. Because the last 5 years, those terms have become so much more relevant. So many more kids are identifying with them. You'd be crazy. We did a survey for the city of Atlanta, and 30% of TGNC people, so trans and gender non-conforming people, 30% of people, 1/3 of those community members identified as non-conforming or non-binary. Wow. And that's a huge jump from what we used to see as far as numbers, a decade, 2 decades ago. This is not, quote unquote, this issue, if you want to call it an issue, is not going away. If anything, it's just going to be more relevant, and how you deal with, these communities and spaces in your faith is what's going to either have you on the right side of history or on the wrong side of history. And kids are what are changing this perspective. TikTok, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all these different crazy spaces, and queer kids and people who don't identify this way, and breaking down all these amazing barriers for people to, love and accept one another. And the vast majority of kids, when you look at them, teens, elementary school kids, everything, they've already all been exposed to this, and they're all totally fine with it for the most part. Again, unless you grew up in an extremely crazy, very religious or very conservative, or, from Georgia, country.
Or if you're taught hate at your table, regardless of what.
You're taught hate at your table, you're going to hate. But otherwise, most kids just don't care anymore. Yeah. And I think that we're heading in this amazing space of the next 10 to 15 years, really seeing things kind of change and breaking down beyond the binary. And it's important that we break down beyond that. If Uzma wants to wear a pantsuit versus a shirt shalvar, or a skirt with her hijab or not hijab, or it doesn't matter to me. It makes no difference in my day-to-day life what Uzma wears, or what your followers wear, or how they identify, or what their pronouns are. All I do is love and respect people. And when somebody tells me these are my pronouns, or this is how I identify, I go out of my way to try to use those. And even I'm a trans activist and an advocate. And honey, I'm from I'm 40, 20 years in this space, and I still mess up on pronouns. And I have issues with they and them. And
I feel validated. Like that, right? Good, because I stumbled a couple of times.
People are like, I said my pronouns today. I'm like, I'm so sorry, and I correct myself, and I make an active attempt to make that person feel comfortable and loved and affirmed. And that's all you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's whether you're talking about LGBTQ people, you're talking about a young Muslim girl or a boy or cis people, when we're talking about any other kind of marginalization.
Yeah. Call people what they want to be called. That's not hard.
Our names. If your followers are listening and they can't really relate, Uzma, how many times have you had your name misspelled in an email,
Butchered.
or constantly when you're working in a career or out, somebody constantly call you the wrong name? How does that feel? Does it make you feel like you're less than, especially when it's repetitive, right?
Yeah.
In a space, you're like, my name is Uzma. My name is Uzma to your boss. My name is Uzma, not Usma, not Usma, not, you know what I mean?
Not Uzma.
Uza, not, Firuza or whatever. And it kind of devalues you as a person. It makes you feel less than. And it's the best way to kind of describe how somebody feels when you're constantly, using the wrong pronouns or purposefully being mean. It just makes somebody feel less than. Why?
Yeah, it's completely unnecessary. The last question I wanted to find out about, since we've been talking a lot about kids, we've been talking about motherhood. Are you comfortable talking about your journey to motherhood and how that was limited by discrimination?
Absolutely. So again, Stephen and I are now divorced. My ex-husband and I, we've been separated or divorced for 4 years. And prior to the last year, when we were kind of going through all those troubles, and I talked about Trump exacerbating all that and everything. I think a part of me in my mind, with all my marital problems and everything else that was going on, which often women do, thought that if I became a mom,
it'll go away.
I could give all my love and my energy and devote everything else. I might be able to save my marriage. I might be able to save my life. I might be able to save, where this feeling is going and heading. And we had gone through, DFACs and done all the certifications and classes and everything else. At first I wanted to adopt a baby, but then I realized really in my heart that it didn't matter to me whether it was a baby, whether a child was 2 years old or 4 years old or 7 years old, as long as it was a child who needed a home and that I could provide that. And we went through that whole process undercover. So I wasn't out at that time.
Right.
But people who were out in Georgia at that time were being discriminated against. And Georgia is still one of those states where they don't have a really inclusive policy, but they also don't have you can't do this, this, and this. So for example, religious organizations that foster can still discriminate against you.
Yes.
Based on your identity. Our governor is still Kemp, not for long though. Stacey's running next year, hopefully. And we're going to get him out of office. But that being said, yes, it was a very interesting experience because I didn't even feel comfortable enough to be out as a trans woman. If I was on my application, I thought that they would deny us.
Right.
By the state. And I still would love to be a mom. In a way, my nephews and nieces call me Auntie Mama, which is like second mommy. I love children. I was actually supposed to be a doctor when I was younger. I was going to be a pediatrician. I had gone through and gotten into Stanford. And I really was go. And my senior year of high school, trans woman who's a pediatrician in Texas, I think it was outed and lost her whole practice after 10 years of, residency and everything else in school. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. I love kids. And I'm happy to be the free space for my family where, like my sister-in-law needs a break. She can bring the boys over for like 5 hours and they can go swimming, hang out with auntie, or spend the night or spend the weekend if they need to take a trip. Family's been back to India before and they've left kids with me because I'm that good, one on the hip, changing a diaper with one hand.
Awesome.
But I'd love to. Ultimately, if I find the right guy and either the right background, if he has his own children, inshallah, then I'll be a mom. And if not, I've decided probably by the time I'm about 43, I'll probably adopt my own child on my own. It's a whole new trend. You should look into it. Single women or women partnering as friends and adopting children together and things like that. I've been reading a lot of articles on it, but it seems that, you don't have to necessarily wait around for the right partner, quote unquote. You might have them in your life already. Yeah. They can be a friend and co-mommying together. So I will see what happens. But if Allah chooses to bless me to be a mom, then I will. And if not, I will keep doing the work that I am doing now, because I feel sometimes like I am a queer mother to a lot of LGBTQ kids around the country.
That's awesome. And we sincerely believe on this podcast that you don't have to have a child in order to mother, because women are born with a natural nurturing energy, and we're always nurturing and nourishing something. So in some way, shape, or form, we're all moms, unless it's that one, there is a contingency of women who's, I love them because they're like, clearly, I don't ever want to have kids. Like, take my equipment out. Like, don't make me do this. And I'm like, yeah, you're onto something, because this is way harder than what I imagined. But we wish you all success and dua for your future. And, I think you would make a fantastic mom because you have all this energy. I would just hate to see it sapped by children that you cannot return at the end of the day or the weekend.
I agree. I see all of my sister-in-laws, and some days I'm like,
like
oh, I could do that. And then there's other days where I'm like, I don't think I could do that, because right now me and you would be on this podcast, and literally I know my child would be like, mommy. Mommy.
Mommy. Awesome. So we like to close by doing a rapid fire segment where we ask a bunch of fun questions. It helps the audience get to know you a little bit better too, but it's, it's not a crazy quiz or anything like that. It's just first thing that comes to your mind, go for it. And it's supposed to be fun. So no pressure. Okay.
Okay.
We've got 1 minute. What's your favorite word?
Love.
What was your first job?
I worked in daycare.
Oh, well, that's not a surprise. Okay. What is one of, sorry?
Pre-transition.
Pre-transition, sure. Yeah. What's one of your favorite memories?
My nephews and nieces being born. As I'll say, I've been able to be present for 2 of them, and it's the most beautiful experience watching a life come into this world and what that's like.
Awesome. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think I would go back to my mom about living positively, making that conscious choice to always choose to be happy. It's not easy, but it's made a very big difference in my life.
Awesome. You got all of those in a minute. And that's something that
was it.
Yeah, that was it. So super easy, right? Yeah. Zeba usually asks more fun questions, but it's kind of a lottery. So it's kind of spinning, and that's what I found. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your time. And I've apologized already for cyber stalking you, but I can't promise that it'll stop. So pre-apology there, and just know that you've got allies on this podcast. And, we're trying to educate our mom sisterhood in, to be prepared. And it's a revelation to me to know from you, to learn from you, that kids are so good at hiding it. And that's really frightening, especially because we know Muslim kids are already so bullied, and already, 60% of them are bullied in school, we find, and there's so many of them that have attempted suicide. I'm somebody who did at those critical 13, 14 sucked. So I think we've all tried something like that. And if we could just, if the parents could dig and in a non-judgmental, safe, loving way, just give the kids an opportunity to flex a little bit.
That's all it is. It's not that you have to, have these crazy in-depth conversations. No. It's just when it pops up, we love everyone. We support everyone. We believe in equality. And again, in your particular family, if it's not something you want to promote or be, in a consistent space where your kids are out, but just providing that quick, we love people, we accept people, we're okay with people. That basic understanding, where versus the kind of hatefulness or
that we grew up with,
not discussing it at all, right? Not talking about it at all, can be the difference between you or a child in your life, your child possibly trying to commit suicide and not, because that simple acknowledgement would say, well, maybe my parents might not be super cool with it, but they always grew up, saying, we love everybody, we support everybody, and we're equal,
and kids are really good about remembering that. But you said. 17 days ago.
Right.
They're not going to
Oh
remember
my
to do
gosh,
the
to this
dishes, but
day.
they will remember what you
I'm
said.
40 years old. I'd be bringing out all the stuff with my mom.
Yeah,
Honey.
totally. And my favorite part of our connection today is I knew I heard Hyderabad in there, and I'm sure in some way, shape, or form we're related because I am also Hyderabadi.
Are you Hyderabadi? Oh my God, we have to make
Totally.
biryani and bagari
Yes.
bagel
Yes.
and Hindi chutney.
Yeah.
I'm down. I love to cook.
Oh, so
I did a
you
whole
know
little
how to make.
cooking segment. Yeah.
Oh
I did
my
Feroza's Corona Kitchen last year during COVID because all my activism was shut down
Yeah.
and I was at home. So then I just started cooking in the kitchen and teaching people how to cook Hyderabadi dishes like khatti dal, bagari
I
bagel,
can't make that.
like
Oh my
all that
gosh.
stuff. So when I was teaching everybody how to make stuff, I would do fundraisers and I raised
Oh,
$10,000 in a matter
oh,
of just, I think it was
you.
like maybe 10 Corona kitchens or something like that for different organizations, Alliance for Black Lives, Trans
Yeah.
Housing, all sorts of different spaces. So,
Yeah. People will pay for Hyderabadi food because it's the
baby,
best.
they were
Yeah.
ready. And then I would just dress up in crazy Indian clothes. Like
Card
one time I wore my
dupatta.
wedding dress. Like I had a full on, like my mom was like, are you cooking in your wedding dress? I was like, Mommy, it's for a really good organization.
Yeah.
And she's like, it's all gonna smell like cooking.
Yeah. I'll just put dryer sheets in it later.
I was like, I'm already divorced. I'm not using the same wedding dress. What do you need to do?
That's awesome. That's awesome. I cannot wait to come to Florida or Georgia. I'm sorry,
Georgia.
and hang out with you. Yeah, I'll find you and probably stalk you and be like, please hang out with me.
I'm down. Come over whenever you want. I'll cook you a big old Hyderabadi meal.
Yeah, and teach me how to make khatti dal because I've never learned.
Please let your co-host know that I hope she feels better. And thank you to all of your followers. Thank you to everybody for tuning in and giving me the opportunity to kind of talk about my experiences. If you guys want to follow me, you can follow me at Feroza Syed ATL on Instagram and Feroza Syed on Facebook. And
Awesome.
always feel free to reach out if you or your family or anybody that is struggling. I'm always more than willing to talk to people and help people in any way I can or provide resources.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Feroza. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Guidance Residential, whose fall refinance special is finally here. Not only can you unlock a lower rate to save thousands of dollars over the course of your contract to own your home sooner, you can also receive $500 towards your appraisal fee. Visit Guidance Residential on Facebook or at Guidance Residential on Instagram today.